Hey, good morning, Dean. Happy October 1st, National Vegetarian Day. Listers who are working with short sales, they've got their work cut out for them. And a lot of experienced short sale agents have their own standard addendums and clauses that they like to see added to the contract to better their odds of getting the short sale through. And I think as a buyer, you want to support that because certainly if you want to buy the house, the short sale agreement is necessary. But sometimes I think the listing agents go too far and they're taking away some of the rights that the buyers should still have when they're buying a property. So I have come up with my Bill of Rights for short sale buyers. Tell me what you think. Number one, the buyer has a right to submit a fair offer. By fair offer, I mean the property should be represented correctly when it's listed. It shouldn't be listed at a low offer that we know the bank is never going to take. And if it's listed at a price that's above market, the buyer should be entitled to put in an offer that reflects market value. They should be able to put in a fair offer. Number two, the buyer is entitled to receive a copy of the executed contract. Now, in the old days, sometimes these contracts weren't even signed. They would just all be sent to the bank, and it was just chaos. Well, these days, the listers that know what they're doing, they submit one executed contract to the lender. And so the buyer should be able to receive an answer from the seller if their offer is the one that's going to the lender within a reasonable time frame, 1 to 2 days, and they should be able to receive a copy of the executed contract. Number three, the buyer has a right to seller commitment. Now, most listers these days of short sales want a commitment from the buyer. A lot of times they want some form of a monetary deposit. And sometimes that money is non-refundable for 60 to 90 days. If the seller is looking for that kind of commitment from the buyer, then the buyer is entitled to that kind of commitment from the seller. So when backup offers come, they can't start taking those backup offers and saying, hey, you got to match this or I'm going to kick your offer and put this one in. Commitment on both sides. Number four, the buyer has a right to pay no extra fees. Some listers charge a fee. Sometimes they have attorneys involved. Sometimes there's some sort of an admin fee. And those are all charged to the seller, but sometimes they try to pass those costs on to the buyer. The buyer is not receiving any benefit from these fees and they should not have to pay for them. Number five, the buyer has the right to receive regular status updates on what's happening with the short sale. Their buyer's agent should be able to call and say, hey, what's going on? Now, some weeks maybe nothing's going on, but some weeks there should be some activity. And if you call week after week and there's nothing going on, then the buyer should know that there's a problem, because there should be at least some regular communication with the lender. Number six, the buyer has a right to an honest assessment and full disclosure of issues that may affect the short sale's likelihood of actually occurring. If there's a HELOC, if there's a delinquent HOA account, if there are tax liens, there's a trustee sale date that's 2 days away, and the buyer has a right to know that going in. Number seven, the buyer has a right to cancel a languishing contract. If nothing's going on after 60 days, 90 days, the buyer should have the right to withdraw their offer and move on. Number eight, the buyer has a right to due diligence. So they have their right to do their inspections and make sure that the house is going to work for them. Granted, most of these short sales are done with an as-is addendum, so the seller's not going to be able to do any repairs. But if there's extensive issues, the buyer has a right to know. If there are deal killer issues, like it turns out the roof is leaking, the seller should disclose those ahead because the buyer is not going to just eat that, even though they maybe have waited for 4 or 5 months for an answer. Number nine, the buyer has a right to decline the counteroffer. Now, negotiations of short sales are funky. The seller and the seller's agent are negotiating with their lender to approve the short sale agreement. That's between the bank and the seller. That's their deal. But it does affect the buyer. And a lot of times when the bank wants more money, everybody looks to the buyer to kick in a little more dinero. Well, the buyer has a right to decline that counteroffer. And then finally, number 10, the buyer has a right to a reasonable time to close. Now, sometimes we get these short sale agreements and they give you a week to close. That's ridiculous. If you're paying cash, you got to have at least 2 weeks. And if you're financing, you got to have a minimum of 3 weeks. And that's only if they're a really good lender. More likely, you're going to need 30 days. So I have a fabulous Friday, and we'll see you on Monday. National Vegetarian Day. You know what? I think I might take a break from that holiday. I like my meat and potatoes.